Have you ever thought that a dead man could still serve his country? In the cold archives of the United States Navy, an old forgotten film was found. On it, among the youthful faces of sailors in 1941, there was a man smiling and waving toward the lens, a man who history confirmed died at Pearl Harbor. From that moment, 3 young researchers began a journey into the blurred border between life and death, where the shaky film could contain a message from the past. A message from people caught between 2 worlds, between memory and existence. Tonight, you will enter that story with me. A story of loyalty beyond time, of souls refusing to abandon duty, and of a truth that perhaps humanity is not yet ready to believe. In the quiet summer of 2023, deep inside the National Archives of College Park, Maryland, a small team of documentary filmmakers stumbled upon something that would quietly unmake everything they thought they knew about World War II. It began as an ordinary digitization project, just another day of restoring old naval footage. Yet, what they found would slowly consume months of their lives and leave them questioning the very idea of what we call evidence. Under the hum of the building's old air conditioning, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, 34 years old, a historian who had spent her career studying wartime photography, lifted a metal canister from the shelf. The label, faded in blue ink, was simple: USS Hornet Pacific Theater, July 15, 1943. She had no reason to expect anything unusual. But what she was about to see would change the way she looked at every image of war that came after. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Sarah, wearing her white gloves, fed the fragile 16mm film into the scanner. Beside her, Marcus Chen, 28, quiet, meticulous, adjusted the machine's settings. Their supervisor, Robert Hawthorne, stood behind them, his thick-rimmed glasses reflecting the pale glow of the monitors. Robert had spent 4 decades studying naval history. He thought he'd seen everything. He hadn't. The screen flickered to life, familiar scenes in black and white. Sailors on deck, sunlight striking the wooden planks, the gentle rhythm of the sea beneath the camera's sway. It was routine documentation, the kind Sarah had seen hundreds of times: young men, waving officers, posing life on a warship captured for morale and memory. And then 2 minutes and 37 seconds in, something shifted. A sailor at the far end of the frame turned toward the camera. His face emerged slowly from the shadows. He smiled, lifted his hand, and waved. Just an ordinary gesture, simple, human, fleeting. "Pause it," Sarah said, her tone suddenly sharp. Marcus froze the frame. The sailor's face filled the monitor, clear, sunlit, unmistakable. A square jaw, bright eyes, and a thin scar running from his temple to his cheek. Robert leaned closer. The air in the room seemed to still. "That's impossible," he whispered. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she reached for a folder nearby. From it, she drew a black and white portrait, an official Navy photograph marked with a seal and the date March 3rd, 1943. The same eyes, the same scar, the same man. "Lieutenant James Morrison," she said softly. "USS Arizona." Robert's lips parted, but no sound came. Because Morrison had died at Pearl Harbor. On December 7th, 1941, the room fell silent. Only the steady hum of the machine remained, as if even it didn't dare interrupt what they had just seen. And somewhere deep inside, That flickering footage, a man, long dead, seemed to be smiling back. The resemblance was unmistakable. Every detail, the scar, the eyes, even the angle of his smile was perfect. There has to be an explanation, Marcus said quietly, though even he didn't seem to believe his own words. Maybe a brother, a relative. Robert slowly shook his head. No, Morrison was an only child. I remember his file from my Navy days. His parents died in a car crash when he was 17. There were no siblings, no family left at all. Sarah's hands trembled as she set the photograph down. Her voice was soft but unsteady. Then how is he standing there on the deck of the USS Hornet 8 months after the ship he died on was sunk at Pearl Harbor? The question hung in the air like a chill you can't quite locate. Outside, the Maryland summer heat shimmered on the pavement. But inside that climate-controlled archive, the temperature seemed to drop. Marcus advanced the footage frame by frame. The sailor kept waving for a few more seconds, his movements relaxed. Natural, nothing ghostly about them. Just ordinary. Robert was the first to find his voice again. His tone suddenly steady, professional. We need to verify this. Check the Hornet's manifest for July 1943. Cross-reference it with the Pearl Harbor casualty lists. And so they began. For the next 4 hours, the three of them worked in silence, the hum of the old scanners filling the air like a heartbeat. Sarah pulled personnel files. Marcus enhanced the grainy footage, pixel by pixel. Robert made calls to his old contacts at the Naval History and Heritage Command. By late afternoon, they had a result. The USS Hornet's July 1943 crew manifest listed 2,090 names. Not one of them belonged to James Morrison. And then came another crack in the logic. The official photographer for that date, Petty Officer 3rd Class William Hayes, had been killed in action at the Battle of Midway. That was June 1942, more than a year before this reel was supposedly filmed. Marcus rubbed his temples. This doesn't make sense, he said, voice low. The film canister is authentic. I've tested it. The stock, the reel, the Navy markings, all correct for mid-1943. The ship's structure matches that period too. But the people in it... He looked up at Sarah. They shouldn't exist. Sarah had been silent for nearly an hour. Her eyes stayed fixed on her computer screen, where the enhanced images glowed faintly in the dark. Finally, she spoke. There's something else. She zoomed in on the background of the waving sailor. Between the rigging and machinery, other shapes began to take form. Silhouettes of men blurred by light and distance. I've been running facial recognition on every face I can isolate, she said, her voice calm but trembling slightly. So far, I've identified 12. She paused, scrolling through her notes. 7 of them died at Pearl Harbor. 3 were killed at Guadalcanal in early 1943. 1 died in a training accident in San Diego that February. And 1? Her voice trailed off. 1 was reported missing in action after the Doolittle raid in April 1942. Robert exhaled slowly, sinking back into his chair. 12 men, he murmured, who shouldn't exist, all appearing together months after their deaths. For a long time, none of them spoke. Outside, the sound of evening traffic drifted faintly through the walls as federal workers went home for the day. But inside the archives, time seemed to have stopped. The glow of the monitors painted their faces in pale light, holding them there. 3 living witnesses to something that defied logic. Marcus was the first to break the silence. "There has to be a rational explanation," he said, almost pleading. "Maybe the footage was mislabeled. Maybe it's older before Pearl Harbor." Sarah shook her head. "I thought of that too. But look." She pointed to the background of the frame. "That's battle damage from the Doolittle raid, repaired in May 1943. Robert leaned forward, his voice quiet but certain. The Hornet was modified extensively in early 43. The footage shows those modifications. This was filmed after. As the light outside dimmed into the gold of early evening, the 3 of them sat together in the humming stillness of the archive, their screens frozen on one impossible image, a sailor smiling and waving as if greeting them across time. His expression open, friendly, alive, yet by every record, every photograph, every line of ink in the Navy archives. Lieutenant James Morrison had been dead for over a year and a half, and somehow, impossibly, he wasn't alone. The next morning arrived grey and overcast, the kind of heavy sky that seemed to press down on the building itself. The atmosphere inside the archives felt subdued, as if the mystery from the night before had settled into the walls. Sarah hadn't slept. Her thoughts looped endlessly, questions without answers, faces from another time flickering behind her eyes. When she entered the digitization lab, Marcus was already there. He sat surrounded by printouts, monitors glowing softly in the dim light. The faint smell of old paper and warm electronics filled the air. "You're here early," Sarah said, setting her coffee down. Her hands were still trembling slightly. "Couldn't sleep?" Marcus replied, eyes fixed on the screen. "I've been running every test we have, authenticity checks, dating algorithms, digital tampering detection. Everything comes back clean." He looked up briefly and the circles under his eyes told the story. "This film," he said, "is exactly what it appears to be. Authentic 1943 footage, shot aboard the USS Hornet." Before Sarah could respond, the door opened. Robert stepped in a thick manila folder tucked under his arm, his expression heavy. "I've been on the phone with the Navy archives since 6 this morning," he announced. "They're sending someone down today." Sarah's stomach tightened. Why, she asked softly, though she already knew. Robert spread several photographs across the table. "Because what we found here," he said, "isn't an isolated incident." He pointed to one of the photos, a group of sailors posing on the deck of a destroyer. The image was stamped and dated August 1944. Sarah leaned closer. "What's special about this one?" "Look at the third man from the left," Robert said grimly. Her breath caught. The man's face was older, lined, his hair touched with grey, but unmistakable. "That's Seaman First Class David Richardson," Robert said. "Killed at Pearl Harbor aboard the USS Oklahoma. This photograph was taken on the USS Fletcher nearly 3 years after his death." Marcus finally tore his gaze from his monitor, his voice barely above a whisper. "How many of these are there?" Robert exhaled slowly. "Commander Patricia Wells from the Naval History Command wouldn't give me numbers over the phone, but she mentioned cases. Dozens, maybe more. Reports going back to 1942 all the way through the end of the war. Always the same pattern, Sailors confirmed dead at Pearl Harbor, appearing in later photographs and film reels. The words seemed to drain the air from the room. Sarah turned back to the monitor, where the frozen image of the waving sailor still lingered. His cheerful expression now looked wrong. That smile, so bright, so human, carried a weight she hadn't seen before. "What did the Navy conclude?" she asked quietly. "Officially," Robert said, "clerical errors, misidentified personnel, hoaxes." He hesitated. "But Wells is coming here because she thinks this might be different. Something that can't be brushed aside." The morning crept forward. Marcus continued running, his analysis eyes darting between data logs. Sarah spent the hours digging deeper into the sailors' lives, their families, their histories, and what she found made the mystery feel unbearably human. Lieutenant James Morrison, the man from their footage, had been engaged. Her name was Helen Crawford, a young woman from San Francisco. After his death at Pearl Harbor, she had waited 2 long years before finally giving up hope. Sarah found a yellowed newspaper clipping. "Helen Crawford marries local businessman, September 1943. Just 2 months after Morrison appeared alive on the Hornet. Sarah held up the clipping. "This is what troubles me the most," she said softly. These weren't just records, these were real people, with families, grief, and closure. They buried their sons, their fiancés, and somehow, impossibly, those men appear to have kept on living. The room fell into a heavy silence. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Commander Patricia Wells arrived. She was in her mid-50s, tall, composed, with steel grey hair pulled neatly back. Her presence carried the quiet authority of someone used to secrecy. Her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp. But behind that professionalism, Sarah sensed tension, the kind that comes from walking into something you've already been warned about. "I need to see the footage," Wells said simply. They gathered around the monitor. Marcus played the enhanced version, his fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. The black and white film began again. The deck of the Hornet. The rhythmic motion of sailors at work. The glint of sunlight off the sea. When the waving sailor appeared, Wells leaned forward, her jaw tightening ever so slightly. "Can you enhance this section?" she asked, pointing toward a cluster of men in the background. Marcus adjusted the controls. The image zoomed in, grain sharpening, until 3 faces emerged ghostly clear beneath the flicker of old film. Wells studied them for a long moment. Her face remained calm, but Sarah noticed how her knuckles whitened where she gripped the edge of the desk. Then, finally, Wells spoke. "The man in the photo on the left is Petty Officer Michael Torres, a crewman on the USS California. He died on the morning of December 7th, 1941. The man in the middle is enlisted man Andrew Walsh aboard the USS West Virginia, who also died that same bloody day at Pearl Harbor." Sarah spoke slowly, the light from the screen reflecting in her eyes. "And the third man? Do you recognize him?" Wells shook his head. "No, I don't know who he is." Sarah lowered her voice. "That's Robert Chen, engine room, seaman 3rd class. He was Marcus's grandfather." The room was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioner blowing. Marcus sat there, his face pale, as if the blood had just drained from his body. "No way," he said, his voice hoarse. "My grandfather died at Pearl Harbor. My family still has his purple medal. my grandmother got the death notice from the Navy. Wells turned to him, a look of sympathy in her eyes. "Mr. Chen, how much do you know about your grandfather's service record?" "Almost everything," Marcus said softly. "He enlisted in 1940, served on the Arizona, died in the attack. My family has papers, photos, letters, everything." "Have you ever seen a photo taken after December 7th, 1941, Wells asked. Marcus shook his head. "Of course not. My grandfather is dead." Wells opened her briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. "What I'm about to show you is still classified." She opened the envelope, took out a photo, and placed it gently on the table. The old photograph bore the word "classified" and the date March 15th, 1944. It showed a group of sailors standing on a dock with ships moored in the background. And right in the middle of the group, there was no mistaking, it was Robert Chen. A little older, but the eyes, the smile, the posture, everything matched the man who had supposedly died 3 years earlier. This was taken at Pearl Harbor. "Wells," said his voice, low and even. "Your grandfather appears in several others from 1942 to 1944. Each time he looked exactly the age he would have been had he still been alive." No one spoke. There was only the sound of the air conditioner and the pounding of Sarah's heart in her ears. She tried to find words but could only whisper, "Commander Wells, what exactly are we facing?" Wells was silent for a long moment, as if considering each word. "Officially, these events are classified as unexplained phenomena. But unofficially," she paused, her eyes scanning each face, "we believe this is some form of time travel." Marcus repeated, his voice almost choking. "Time travel. According to our working theory," Wells said, "the 1941 attack created a kind of disturbance in space-time. Some of the people who died that day seem to continue to exist in a parallel timeline or an alternate reality. They are still aging normally. They are seen in various places, but they don't know. They're dead." Robert, the oldest person in the room, leaned back in his chair, his face aging a few years. "So how long has the Navy known about this?" "Since 1942, Wells admitted. But we've never had such clear evidence before. In the past, similar incidents have often been attributed to mistakes, faulty records, or the vague memories of witnesses. But this time, with this photo and Mr. Chen's family connection," she paused, shaking her head slightly. "There's no denying it anymore." Sarah looked back at the screen the sailor was waving and smiling a smile that now carried the weight of an untouchable tragedy. "And what about them?" she asked softly. "The people in the photo, where did they go?" "We're still trying to find out," Wells replied. "The last recorded sighting was August 1945, right after Japan surrendered. After that, it was gone. No more photos, no documents, no trace." The afternoon slowly fell. Wells continued to share more top-secret files. Each file opened up a new layer of mystery dead sailors, yet still seen all over the Pacific. Living, working, aging as if death had never come. Some appeared alone, others in groups, but all were listed in official records. They were paid, had duties, had ranks. It was just no one remembered ever recruiting them. No one remembered seeing them enlist. Marcus was silent all afternoon, his eyes fixed on the 1944 photograph of his smiling grandfather. Finally, he said quietly, almost to himself, "My grandmother used to say, sometimes she still felt him out there somewhere, as if he had never really left. Maybe you're right," Sarah said softly, her voice choking. We all thought it was just the widow's longing, but maybe she really felt he was still there somewhere. As the night began to fall, Wells packed up the top secret files, putting each photo, each piece of evidence back into the briefcase. "There's one thing I need you to promise me," she said, her voice low but firm. "What you saw today, keep it absolutely confidential. The Navy is reopening the investigation, but we need time to understand what all this really means." The door closed behind Wells, leaving the three of them sitting silently in the dim archive room. The faint light came from the projection screen where the sailor was still waving, the smile stuck forever in the moment. It was Marcus who spoke first. "What do we do now?" Sarah looked at James Morrison's smiling face in the frame, feeling the weight of something beyond human limits. "We keep looking," she said softly. "There will be other footage, more evidence. If they really continue to exist somehow, there must be traces somewhere." But even as she said the words, deep down, Sarah knew they had crossed a blurred line between reality and impossibility. The sailor's wave, it was no longer a greeting. It was a cry for help coming from beyond time. A message from souls caught between life and death, between existence and memory. And somewhere in the wooden shelves of the vast archive, there were still untouched reels of film hiding secrets that would shake everything humanity thought it understood about time, about the soul and the fragile boundaries that separated them. 3 weeks later, the archives building had changed in Sarah's eyes. The familiar hallways seemed longer, darker. The closed doors seemed as if something were watching. She had barely left the building for 3 weeks, haunted by the image of the waving sailor and by the never-ending question, where did they go? Then at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in late August, she found it. A roll of film in an old metal box labeled USS Hornet. Personal effects recovered. August 1945. Sarah's hand shook as she fed the film into the scanner. From the first frames, she knew this was unlike any other. Not official archive footage, but something more personal, more real. The camera shook slightly as if held in the hands of a frightened person. The first frame inside a ship's hangar, boxes lined 2 walls, each labeled with a name and service number. But it was the sound that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. The film had sound. A voice rang out, distorted, scratched as if it had been cut through decades. "We don't understand what's happening. We remember dying. But now, we're here." Sarah turned up the volume. Her heart pounding in her chest mixed with the hiss of the tape. Other voices cut in urgent trembling. The attack on Pearl Harbor. I remember the feeling of the explosion. I remember dying. And waking up on this ship, everyone was acting as if I'd never left. Time is wrong. It's like it's passing by on loan from somewhere else. The camera moved slowly, scanning the rows of boxes, each one bearing the names of people Sarah had read about in the files. People who should have died, but were still visible years later. Then the frame froze. A group of sailors sat in a circle in the dim light. Between them, James Morrison. It was no longer the smiling young man from the old footage, but a face heavy with weariness, as if he knew all too well what awaited him. "We know what happened," Morrison said, his voice clear through the static. "That attack did something to us. It took us away from where we should have ended, threw us here." Another man spoke, his voice deeper, trembling. Sarah recognized him. David Richardson, a name familiar from old photos. "We aren't really alive anymore, are we? We're just echoes, shadows of ourselves." A third voice chimed in, faint as if from afar. Sarah zoomed in and her heart sank. Robert Chen, Marcus's grandfather. Older than ever, his eyes sunken, but still kind. "Every day, we remember less," he said softly. "Remember less of what was. Every day we become less real." Morrison nodded, his eyes on the floor. "The war is almost over. Japan has surrendered, and we can feel our time is ending. What keeps us here is fading." Sarah sat there for a long time, looking at the blurry faces of the soldiers no longer of this world. Their voices mixed with the wind outside the frame door. A feeling crept into her that somehow they were still trying to say something. A final message to the living. The camera slowly pulls back to reveal the room. 23 men, all of them casualties of Pearl Harbor. All of them present here on a ship in the Pacific, August 1945. They appear as silhouettes, a blur at the edges of the frame, as if the world around them were more real than they were. Souls in the shape of soldiers, silently existing in the space between what was alive and what hadn't left. Morrison raises his head, his eyes fixed on the lens. "We want to leave a message. For our families, for whoever finds this. We didn't just die that day at Pearl Harbor. Somehow, inexplicably, we continued to serve. 4 more years. We saw the war end. We saw America win." Richardson turns away, his eyes red. "My wife remarried. I looked at the file, and I'm glad she's not waiting for someone who's dead. But I want her to know. Somehow, a part of me keeps fighting." It was Robert Chen's turn to speak. His voice was heavy with emotion. "Tell my son, someday, when he has children, tell them that their grandfather still served, even when death couldn't stop him." The camera began to shake slightly. Someone behind the lens was crying. A young, choked voice said softly, "I'm sorry. I don't understand what's happening to all of us." Morrison nodded slightly, his body flickering like a grainy television image. "Nobody understands," he said, "but we know. It's almost time. We can feel it. We're fading away. Back to where we should be." One by one, the soldiers began to fade, their bodies transparent, disappearing like mist in the dawn. Morrison was the last one left. His voice faded, blending with the crackling of the film. "If anyone finds this, tell them we were here. That love and duty can transcend death, transcend time. And sometimes, when the world needs it, even the dead, find a way to continue serving." The frame stretched in silence. Empty boxes, spaces where impossible men once sat. Then the screen slowly brightened to an image of the deck at dawn. The sky was calm. The sea was calm. There was no trace of the ghost crew. Sarah sat there in the dark room, lit only by the light of the screen. Tears streamed down without her realizing it. Not just for the wonder of the impossible, but for the tragic beauty of what she had just witnessed. Men who had died for their country were given 4 more years to serve to witness the victory they had never seen. When Marcus and Robert entered the next morning, they found Sarah still sitting in the same place, her eyes red, the last frame still on the empty deck. "Sarah, are you okay?" Marcus asked softly. She turned her voice hoarse but firm. "I found them. All of them. I know what happened to those soldiers." For an hour, she played the film back to them and watched each reaction. Marcus burst into tears when he saw his grandfather speaking to posterity. Robert sat silently, his eyes blank, all doubt seemingly gone. When the film ended, the 3 of them sat still, no one speaking. The air seemed to freeze. Until Marcus spoke, "What do we do with it?" Sarah looked at the empty frame where the unreal men had stood. "We do what they wanted," she said. "Let people know that they were here, that loyalty, love, and duty can overcome death." Robert nodded slowly. "Whether anyone believes it is none of our business. Our job is to preserve history." He looked at the screen. "And this is history, the most extraordinary document ever seen." The early morning sunlight streamed through the windows, pouring down onto the archive room. Sarah began to preserve the film, each movement slow, careful as if tending to a soul. She thought of Helen Crawford, the woman who waited in vain for her fiancé James Morrison, never knowing that somehow he was still fighting. She thought of Marcus's family, who kept the purple medal as a symbol of loss, not knowing that its recipient would still be alive, at least in a different form, for another 4 years. And she thought of those 23 men who were caught between life and death, but still chose to use their borrowed time to continue serving. She understood then that wave that had opened the investigation was not a greeting, but a message. A message sent across time from the dead that they were still here, still loyal, still defending their country even after they had passed the threshold of life. When Sarah sealed the film roll into the storage box, she knew they had found something beyond history. Not just an anomaly of time, but proof that love and sacrifice can reach the eternal. The waved sailor incident is closed, but the questions it raises will resonate forever, because some truths are too big to be locked away in classified files, too profound to be explained by reason. And somewhere in the Pacific, where the USS Arizona rests with thousands of souls, perhaps those 23 soldiers have returned home. Their borrowed time has ended, but their story will never fade. A story of loyalty that transcends the boundaries of death, of love that makes the dead find their way back, and of mysteries that make us understand that perhaps death is never the final chapter of a true life. Sarah gently closed the lid of the metal box. Outside, dawn was breaking. A new day had begun, but in that room, the past still whispered,